Tonight, we're covering the life and legacy of the legendary Julius Caesar. Caesar was a brilliant military commander, a masterful politician, and a visionary leader whose ambition reshaped the course of Roman history. From his stunning conquest of Gaul to his pivotal role in the fall of the Roman Republic, his influence is still felt today. So, before we dive into this incredible journey, take a moment, if you haven't already, to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let us know the time and location from which you are watching. Now, let's get right into our fascinating story, and we hope it helps you learn while you sleep. On a warm summer day in 100 BC, a child was born into one of Rome's oldest and most influential families, the gens Julia. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar, and though no one knew it at the time, he would grow to be one of the most powerful and legendary figures in history. Rome, at the time of Caesar's birth, was a republic, ruled not by a king, but by a senate and elected officials. However, beneath its facade of democracy, Rome was a place of corruption, political intrigue, and deadly rivalries. Wealthy aristocrats controlled most of the power, and the common people, the plebeians, had little say in government. It was a world where ambition could lead to greatness, but just as often, to ruin and death. Caesar's family was of noble lineage, but they were not among the wealthiest. The Julians claimed descent from the goddess Venus, an association that would later play a major role in Caesar's self-image and political strategy. His father, Gaius Julius Caesar the Elder, was a senator and governor, but his sudden death when Caesar was just 16 years old left the family vulnerable. Despite this loss, his mother, Aurelia, played a crucial role in shaping his future. A strong, intelligent woman, she ensured that her son received a first-class education. Young Caesar studied rhetoric, philosophy, and military strategy, excelling in public speaking, an essential skill for anyone seeking power in Rome. But the political landscape was shifting. A bloody power struggle between two of Rome's most powerful men, Lucius Cornelius Sulla and Gaius Marius, plunged the city into chaos. Caesar's family had close ties to Marius, a champion of the people, which made them enemies of Sulla, the ruthless dictator who seized power. At just 19 years old, Caesar was suddenly marked for execution. Sulla demanded his death, but powerful allies and family connections helped spare his life. Still, it was clear that staying in Rome was too dangerous. To survive, Caesar fled the city and joined the Roman army, beginning his first taste of military life. Stationed in Asia Minor, he fought in battles, gained valuable experience, and even displayed remarkable bravery. One famous story tells of Caesar winning the civic crown, a prestigious Roman military honor, by saving the life of a fellow soldier in combat. By the time he returned to Rome, he had proven himself not just as a nobleman, but as a warrior. Yet Caesar was not just interested in battle, he was drawn to power. He understood that in Rome, power was built through alliances, wealth, and influence. With his intelligence, charm, and natural leadership, he quickly rose through the ranks of Roman politics, making both allies and enemies along the way. But Caesar was not content with mere political success. He had a vision, a grand vision, of a Rome that would be ruled not by corrupt senators, but by one strong, decisive leader. And he was willing to do whatever it took to become that leader. Julius Caesar had survived his early years through a combination of cunning, bravery, and political instinct. By the time he returned to Rome, he was no longer just the son of a noble family. He was a rising force in Roman politics. But in a city where ambition was often met with a dagger in the dark, Caesar had to move carefully. He understood one fundamental truth about Rome: power was not simply taken, it was built through alliances. Caesar's first step toward political dominance was to win the hearts of the Roman people. He quickly became known for his extravagant public events, hosting lavish games and feasts, spending money freely to gain favor. Many senators dismissed him as a reckless spender, but the common people adored him. But charm alone wouldn't be enough. Caesar needed political influence, and he pursued it ruthlessly. He climbed the ranks of Roman government, holding key positions such as military tribune, quaestor, and eventually aedile, a position that allowed him to oversee public works and festivals. His strategy worked. By the time he was in his early 30s, he was one of the most popular men in Rome. During this time, an incident occurred that would showcase Caesar's fearlessness and ambition. While sailing across the Mediterranean, Caesar was captured by Cilician pirates, a ruthless group that regularly kidnapped wealthy Romans for ransom. The pirates demanded 20 talents of silver for his release, a huge sum. Caesar laughed in their faces. He demanded they raise the ransom to 50 talents, insisting that he was worth far more than their initial demand. The pirates, amused by his arrogance, agreed. For weeks, Caesar lived among them, treating them not as captors, but as inferiors. He joked with them, participated in their activities, but never let them forget who he was. When they finally released him, Caesar immediately raised a fleet, hunted the pirates down, and personally oversaw their execution. He had turned his kidnapping into a demonstration of his power and ruthlessness. By 68 BC, Caesar was elected quaestor, giving him a foothold in the Roman Senate. He used this position to build powerful alliances, particularly with Marcus Crassus, the richest man in Rome. Crassus, though immensely wealthy, lacked military power. Caesar, meanwhile, needed financial backing to continue his rise. Their partnership was one of mutual benefit. But even as Caesar's influence grew, Rome itself was descending into chaos. The Senate was corrupt, political factions were at war, and violence had become a common tool of governance. One man, however, seemed to have the power to restore order: Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great. Pompey was Rome's most celebrated general, a war hero who had expanded the empire's borders. But he had enemies in the Senate, and Caesar saw an opportunity. By 60 BC, Caesar orchestrated one of the most powerful political moves in Roman history. He formed a secret alliance with Pompey and Crassus, combining military strength, wealth, and political cunning into one unstoppable force. This alliance, known as the First Triumvirate, allowed Caesar to win the consulship in 59 BC, the highest elected office in Rome. Once in power, he pushed through laws that benefited both Crassus and Pompey, strengthening their hold over Rome. But Caesar was not interested in simply being a politician. He hungered for military glory, and his next move would change the course of history. He set his sights on Gaul, the vast, untamed land that stretched across modern-day France. If he could conquer Gaul, he would become Rome's greatest general. And with that power, he would no longer need anyone else's support. By 58 BC, Julius Caesar had positioned himself as one of the most powerful politicians in Rome. But politics alone would not secure his place in history. Military glory was the true path to power. Rome had always admired its greatest generals, and Caesar knew that if he could lead a successful campaign, his influence would become unstoppable. His target was Gaul, a vast, untamed land populated by fierce Celtic tribes. Though Rome had traded and fought skirmishes with these tribes for years, much of Gaul remained independent. A full-scale conquest would be one of the most ambitious military campaigns in Roman history. And Caesar was more than ready for the challenge. Caesar's opportunity came when a massive tribe known as the Helvetii began migrating through Gaul. Over 300,000 people, including warriors, women, and children, moved across the land, threatening Roman territory. Caesar acted swiftly. With only 6 legions, about 30,000 men, he confronted the Helvetii near the Rhone River. Though vastly outnumbered, his tactical brilliance turned the battle in Rome's favor. He cut off their supply lines, forcing them to surrender. It was a clear message to the rest of Gaul: Rome was coming. But defeating the Helvetii was just the beginning. Soon, a powerful Germanic warlord, Ariovistus, marched into Gaul, bringing thousands of warriors with him. He had already allied with some Gallic tribes, and if left unchecked, he could unite Gaul against Rome. Caesar wouldn't allow it. In a decisive battle, he crushed Ariovistus' forces, driving the Germans back across the Rhine River. The victory solidified Caesar's control over eastern Gaul, but it also set the stage for an even greater conflict. For years, Caesar continued his campaign of conquest, battling different Gallic tribes, playing them against each other, and using diplomacy when needed. But in 52 BC, the Gauls united against Rome under the leadership of a fierce and brilliant chieftain, Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix understood that he couldn't defeat Rome in open battle. Instead, he used scorched earth tactics, burning villages and farmland to starve the Romans. He led lightning-fast raids, avoiding direct confrontation with Caesar's legions. It was the greatest challenge Caesar had ever faced. The war culminated in the siege of Alesia, where Vercingetorix and his 80,000 warriors fortified themselves inside a massive hilltop city. Caesar, with about 50,000 Roman soldiers, faced a difficult decision: attack the well-defended fortress, or starve them out. He chose the latter. Caesar ordered the construction of 2 enormous walls, one surrounding Alesia to keep the Gauls trapped inside, and another facing outward to protect against reinforcements. For weeks, starvation and disease ravaged the defenders. When a massive relief army of 250,000 Gauls arrived, the Romans found themselves surrounded on both sides. But in one of the most brilliant tactical maneuvers in history, Caesar personally led his forces in a final counterattack, breaking through enemy lines and forcing Vercingetorix to surrender. Rome had won. The conquest of Gaul was complete. In just 8 years, Caesar had expanded Rome's territory to its largest extent yet, bringing immense wealth, slaves, and resources into the empire. More importantly, he had transformed himself from a politician into a living legend. His soldiers were fanatically loyal, his victories had made him one of the most powerful men in Rome, and the people of the Republic worshipped him as a hero. But back in Rome, jealous rivals feared his growing power, and soon they would demand that he give it all up. But Julius Caesar was not a man to simply walk away from power. He was about to make a decision that would change history forever. By 50 BC, Julius Caesar was at the height of his power. The conquest of Gaul had made him a legendary general, and his legions were fiercely loyal. He had spent nearly a decade fighting in foreign lands, but now, his greatest battle was about to begin, not against foreign enemies, but against his own countrymen. Back in Rome, the Senate was growing increasingly uneasy about Caesar's rising influence. Many of the patrician elite feared that he was becoming too powerful, and his old ally Pompey the Great had now turned against him. Pompey had once been Caesar's closest political partner, but with Crassus dead and Caesar growing more influential, Pompey aligned himself with the Senate, positioning himself as the defender of the Republic. The Senate, dominated by Caesar's enemies, issued a direct order. Julius Caesar must disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. If he obeyed, he would be stripped of his power and possibly put on trial for corruption and treason. If he refused, he would be declared an enemy of Rome. Caesar was at a crossroads. On January 10, 49 BC, Caesar and his 13th legion reached the Rubicon River, the small boundary that marked the edge of Roman territory. By law, no general was allowed to bring an army into Italy. Doing so was considered an act of war. Caesar paused on the riverbank, knowing that what he was about to do would change the course of history. Then, he spoke the words that would echo through time. Alia iacta est, the die is cast. With that, he led his army across the Rubicon, marching toward Rome. Civil war had begun. Caesar's move stunned his enemies. Many had expected him to surrender, not invade Italy. Pompey and the Senate, caught off guard, panicked. Instead of preparing for battle, Pompey fled Rome, gathering his forces in the south. Caesar entered the city unopposed, taking control without a fight. But he knew the war was far from over. Pompey had fled to Greece, where he was assembling a massive army to challenge Caesar. Without hesitation, Caesar pursued him. In 48 BC, the two great generals finally met in battle near the city of Pharsalus. Pompey's army was twice the size of Caesar's, and many believed the battle would be his victory. But Caesar, with his superior tactics and veteran legions, turned the tide. He crushed Pompey's forces, sending them into a desperate retreat. Pompey himself fled to Egypt, hoping for refuge. But instead of finding safety, he was betrayed by the Egyptian pharaoh Ptolemy XIII, who saw an opportunity to gain Caesar's favor. Pompey was assassinated on the shores of Egypt, his head delivered to Caesar as a gift. When Caesar saw his former ally's severed head, he was not pleased. He reportedly wept, mourning the loss of a once great man. Though they had become bitter rivals, Pompey had been a Roman, and to Caesar, his execution by foreigners was an insult. Now, with Pompey dead, Caesar's dominance seemed assured. But new challenges awaited him in Egypt, where he would become entangled in one of the most famous love affairs in history. The story of Caesar and Cleopatra was about to begin. With Pompey dead, Julius Caesar was now the most powerful man in Rome. But his journey was far from over. His pursuit of Pompey had brought him to Egypt, a land of ancient wealth, political intrigue, and a ruler who would change the course of his life. Cleopatra 7. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC, he found Egypt in the midst of a civil war. The young pharaoh, Ptolemy XIII, had seized power, forcing his sister, Cleopatra, into exile. The two siblings, both descended from Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy I, were locked in a brutal struggle for control of the throne. Cleopatra knew that if she wanted to reclaim power, she needed a powerful ally. And there was no greater ally than Julius Caesar. Cleopatra was known for her intelligence, ambition, and charm. To meet Caesar without Ptolemy's guards stopping her, she devised a legendary plan. One night she had herself smuggled into the royal palace, wrapped in a carpet. When the carpet was unrolled before Caesar, Cleopatra emerged, dazzling and confident. The Roman general was instantly captivated. She was not just beautiful, she was brilliant, speaking multiple languages and possessing an unrivaled political mind. That night, Cleopatra and Caesar forged an alliance, one that would change history. Ptolemy XIII was furious when he learned that Caesar had sided with Cleopatra. He declared war on the Romans, igniting the siege of Alexandria. Caesar and Cleopatra, trapped in the city, fought desperately against Ptolemy's forces. For months the fighting raged, with Roman reinforcements struggling to break through Egyptian defenses. At one point, Caesar himself was nearly killed, forced to swim across the harbor to escape an enemy attack. But despite the dangers, he never wavered. Finally, in 47 BC, Caesar's legions crushed Ptolemy's army. The young pharaoh drowned in the Nile while trying to flee, and Cleopatra was restored to the throne. To solidify her rule, she married her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, as Egyptian custom demanded. But in reality, she ruled alone, by Caesar's side. Cleopatra and Caesar's relationship soon became more than political. They became lovers, and in 47 BC, she gave birth to a son, Ptolemy Caesar, whom she called Caesarion, Little Caesar. Many in Rome were outraged by the affair. The idea of a Roman leader taking an Egyptian queen as a lover, and possibly anointing a half-Egyptian heir, was scandalous. But Caesar did not care. He had won a war, secured Egypt as a Roman ally, and found a partner who matched his intellect and ambition. After months in Egypt, he finally left for Rome, bringing Cleopatra and Caesarion with him. But while Cleopatra dreamed of becoming Queen of Rome, Caesar had unfinished business. The Roman Republic was still in chaos, and Caesar was determined to seize absolute power. He was about to declare himself dictator for life, and the consequences would be deadly. By 46 BC, Julius Caesar had returned to Rome as its undisputed ruler. He had crushed his enemies, secured Egypt as an ally, and expanded Rome's influence across the known world. But his ambitions were far from over. He no longer wanted to be just a consul or general. He wanted absolute control. The Republic had become weak and corrupt, dominated by senators who cared more for their own wealth than the people. Caesar believed that Rome needed a strong, singular leader, and he saw himself as that leader. But in the eyes of many senators, his growing power was a direct threat to the Republic itself. When Caesar marched into Rome in triumph, he was greeted as a conquering hero. The people cheered his name, showered him with flowers, and hailed him as a living god. The Senate, however, was less enthusiastic. Though they had no choice but to accept his rule, many feared he was becoming a king in all but name. After all, Rome had once been ruled by kings, and the Republic had been founded to prevent the rise of another monarch. But Caesar was not concerned with their fears. He accepted the title of Dictator Perpetuo, meaning dictator for life. This was unprecedented. In the past, dictators were temporary leaders, appointed only during emergencies. But Caesar's power had no time limit. To his supporters, he was bringing order and stability to Rome. To his enemies, he was becoming a tyrant. Despite opposition, Caesar set about transforming Rome. He introduced sweeping reforms, including granting Roman citizenship to people in the provinces, expanding Rome's reach, redistributing land to veterans and the poor, reforming the tax system to prevent corruption, overhauling the calendar, creating the Julian calendar, which is still the basis for our modern calendar today. He also filled the Senate with his own supporters, weakening the power of the old aristocracy. But there was one act that truly alarmed his enemies. In early 44 BC, Caesar attended the Lupercalia festival, a traditional Roman celebration. In front of a massive crowd, his ally Mark Antony offered him a golden crown, symbolizing kingship. Caesar refused, but the moment sparked fear in the Senate. Had he been testing the public's reaction? Would he eventually declare himself king? For the senators who had already grown uneasy with his power, this was the final proof they needed. Julius Caesar had to be stopped. A conspiracy began to take shape, a plan to save the Republic by doing the unthinkable. The fate of Rome was about to be decided in blood. By 44 BC, Julius Caesar was at the height of his power. He was dictator for life, the most powerful man in the Roman world. His reforms had reshaped the Republic, and the people adored him. But within the Senate, a storm was brewing. Not everyone saw him as a savior. To many senators, Caesar was no longer just a leader. He was a tyrant, a king in disguise, a threat to the Republic. And they believed there was only one way to stop him. A group of senators, calling themselves the Liberators, began meeting in secret. At the heart of the conspiracy were two men: Gaius Cassius Longinus, a bitter rival of Caesar who resented his growing power; Marcus Junius Brutus, a former ally of Caesar, and a man Caesar trusted deeply. Brutus was the key. He was from one of Rome's most noble families, a descendant of Lucius Junius Brutus, the man who had helped overthrow Rome's last king. Many believed he had a duty to stop Caesar before he destroyed the Republic. Cassius convinced Brutus that if Caesar was not stopped, Rome would become a monarchy once again. Brutus hesitated, but eventually he agreed. The plan was simple: Julius Caesar had to die. The assassins chose March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March, as the day of the attack. A soothsayer had already warned Caesar, "Beware the Ides of March." But Caesar, ever confident, dismissed the warning. He was not afraid of conspiracies. On the morning of March 15th, his wife, Calpurnia, begged him not to go to the Senate. She had dreamed of his murder, of blood spilling in the halls of government. But when one of the conspirators, Decimus Brutus, arrived to escort him to the Senate, Caesar decided to go anyway. Caesar entered the theater of Pompey, where the Senate was meeting. The assassins surrounded him, acting as if they were greeting him. Then, at Cassius' signal, they struck. One senator grabbed Caesar's toga, pulling it over his arms so he couldn't defend himself. Then the knives flashed. First one stab, then another, and another. The dictator fought back at first, wounded but still standing. But then, he saw Brutus among his attackers. According to legend, Caesar's final words were, "Et tu, Brute? Even you, Brutus?" With that, he fell to the ground, his body covered in 23 stab wounds. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in Rome, was dead. His blood pooled on the Senate floor, soaking the feet of his assassins. The Republic had been saved, or so the conspirators thought. But they had miscalculated. They had not just killed a man, they had awakened a storm that would tear Rome apart. The assassination of Julius Caesar would not restore the Republic. It would end it forever. The assassination of Julius Caesar on March 15, 44 BC, was supposed to save the Roman Republic. His killers, the liberators, believed they had struck down a tyrant and restored freedom. But instead of being hailed as heroes, they found themselves in a city on the brink of chaos. Immediately after the assassination, the conspirators expected cheers and celebration. Instead, they were met with silence and uncertainty. The people of Rome had loved Caesar. He had given them land, food, and public games. They saw him as a protector of the common people, not a king. Mark Antony, one of Caesar's closest allies, quickly took control. He was furious over Caesar's murder and vowed revenge. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius, realizing they were not seen as liberators, fled to the Capitoline Hill, trying to rally support. But their plan was falling apart. Caesar's influence was too strong, even in death. A few days after the assassination, Mark Antony revealed Caesar's will to the public. What it contained shocked everyone. Caesar had left money to every citizen of Rome. He had willed his gardens and property to be used as public parks. He had ensured the people of Rome would benefit from his wealth, even in death. The people wept. Their beloved leader had not been a tyrant, he had been their champion. Now, the anger turned toward the assassins. At Caesar's funeral, Mark Antony delivered one of the most famous speeches in history. He did not attack the assassins outright but spoke with sarcasm and cunning, slowly turning the crowd against them. "Brutus is an honorable man," he repeated, but with each line, it became clearer. Brutus and the others had not saved Rome. They had murdered its greatest leader. Then Antony revealed Caesar's bloody toga, holding it up for all to see. The sight of their leader's stab wounds, his betrayal, was too much for the people to bear. Riots erupted. The city descended into chaos. Brutus, Cassius, and the other assassins fled Rome, realizing their plan had failed. They had expected to be seen as heroes, but now they were hunted men. With the conspirators gone, two powerful figures now vied for control. Mark Antony, the fiery and experienced general, Caesar's right-hand man. Gaius Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, an 18-year-old with ambition far beyond his years. At first, Antony underestimated Octavian. The boy was young, sickly, and untested in war. But Octavian had Caesar's name, and that was enough to gain support. The two men would soon be on a collision course, leading to a war that would decide the fate of Rome itself. The assassination of Caesar had been meant to save the Republic, but instead, it led to its final downfall. Caesar's death left a power vacuum, one that neither the Senate nor the conspirators could control. Rome would never return to democracy. Instead, it was about to witness the rise of an empire. And at the center of it all was a young man named Octavian, who would soon become the most powerful ruler Rome had ever seen. The Republic was dead. But the age of emperors was just beginning. With Julius Caesar dead, the Roman Republic was in chaos. The assassination had not restored democracy. It had plunged Rome into another civil war. The two men who would determine its fate were Mark Antony, Caesar's most trusted general, and Gaius Octavian, Caesar's young and ambitious adopted heir. At first, many believed that Mark Antony would take control. He was an experienced commander, a fiery speaker, and had the loyalty of Caesar's veteran legions. But Octavian, despite being only 18 years old, had something Antony didn't: Caesar's name. He was officially Caesar's heir, and the people of Rome were eager to support him. Antony mocked Octavian, calling him a boy playing at politics. But he underestimated how ruthless and cunning Octavian could be. Both men knew that Rome's real enemies were still out there. Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of Caesar's assassination, had gathered an army in the east. In 43 BC, Octavian and Antony, along with the third leader, Marcus Lepidus, formed the Second Triumvirate, a temporary alliance to defeat Caesar's killers. But before going to war, they first purged Rome of their enemies. They created proscription lists, names of senators and wealthy elites they wanted dead. If someone's name was on the list, they were hunted down and executed. Their wealth and land were confiscated to fund the army. One of the most famous victims was Cicero, the great orator and one of Antony's harshest critics. Antony personally ensured his execution, and Cicero's severed head and hands were nailed to the Senate doors, a brutal warning to others who opposed them. With Rome cleansed of opposition, the triumvirate turned their attention to Brutus and Cassius. The final confrontation came in 42 BC, at Philippi, in northern Greece. On one side were the forces of Brutus and Cassius, the self-proclaimed liberators of Rome. On the other were Octavian and Antony, leading an army of legionaries loyal to Caesar's memory. The battle was fierce. Antony, a seasoned warrior, led his troops aggressively. Octavian, still inexperienced, nearly died in battle, but his forces held. Eventually, the conspirators were defeated. Cassius, believing all was lost, committed suicide before the battle had even ended. Brutus fought on bravely, but, realizing he had no escape, also took his own life. When Octavian found Brutus' body, he refused to spare him any dignity, leaving him unburied, a final insult to the man who had killed his adoptive father. The liberators were dead. The last hope of the Republic was gone. With Brutus and Cassius defeated, Antony and Octavian now ruled Rome together. But it was only a matter of time before they turned against each other. Lepidus was quickly sidelined, leaving just Antony and Octavian. Antony, now a hero of the East, traveled to Egypt, where he fell under the spell of Cleopatra, beginning one of the most infamous love affairs in history. Octavian, left in Rome, carefully built his own power base, preparing for the final battle that would decide the fate of Rome. Rome's last civil war was coming, and only one man would emerge as emperor. With Brutus and Cassius dead, the Republic was gone, but Rome was not yet at peace. The alliance between Mark Antony and Octavian was unraveling. The final battle for Julius Caesar's legacy was about to begin. After the victory at Philippi, Antony took control of the eastern provinces, including Egypt. There, he met Cleopatra once again, and the two became lovers. Their affair was not just personal, it was political. Antony saw Egypt as a powerful ally, and Cleopatra saw Antony as a means to expand her own rule. Together, they began preparing for war against Octavian. Meanwhile, in Rome, Octavian was turning public opinion against them. He painted Antony as a traitor, claiming he had abandoned Rome for a foreign queen. He forged Antony's will, revealing, possibly falsely, that Antony planned to give Roman land to Cleopatra and her children. He declared that Antony was no longer a true Roman, but a puppet of Egypt. The Senate turned against Antony. In 32 BC, Octavian declared war, not on Antony, but on Cleopatra. The final showdown came in 31 BC, at Actium, a naval battle off the coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, commanded by Marcus Agrippa, outmaneuvered and outnumbered Antony and Cleopatra's forces. As the battle turned against them, Cleopatra fled, and Antony, overcome with desperation, followed her. Their fleet was destroyed, and their armies soon deserted them. They had lost everything. Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt, hoping to make a final stand. But when Octavian's forces closed in on Alexandria, they knew the end was near. In 30 BC, Antony, hearing false reports that Cleopatra had taken her own life, fell on his sword. But Cleopatra was still alive. When she found Antony dying, she held him in her arms as he took his last breath. Octavian captured Cleopatra, but she refused to be paraded through Rome as a prisoner. Instead, she took her own life, possibly using a venomous snake hidden in a basket. With their deaths, Egypt became a Roman province, and Octavian stood alone as the ruler of Rome. In 27 BC, Octavian officially ended the Roman Republic and became the first emperor of Rome. He took the name Augustus, meaning the revered one, and ruled for over 40 years, transforming Rome into an empire that would last for centuries. Julius Caesar's legacy lived on, not through a restored republic, but through an empire that bore his name, the Caesars of Rome. Every emperor that followed would use his title, and his family line, the Julio-Claudian dynasty, would rule Rome for generations. Though he had been murdered by his own people, Julius Caesar had won in the end. His adopted son became the first emperor. His military strategies were studied for centuries. His name became synonymous with power. Even in later civilizations, rulers like the Kaisers of Germany, and the Tsars of Russia took their titles from him. Julius Caesar was more than a man, he became a symbol of absolute power. His ambition had destroyed the Republic, but in doing so, he had created an empire that would dominate the world for 500 years. He had changed history forever, and his name would never be forgotten.